All right, for today's explainer, think of us as ecological detectives. We're on the trail of an urban virus. Our crime scene? The suburbs. Our suspects? Some of Australia's most famous animals. And the mystery? Is how a disease from the countryside is suddenly showing up and making people sick in the city.
So this is the central question we're tackling. What in the world could possibly connect a really nasty human illness with, this adorable Australian animal? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is hiding on the fringes of our biggest cities, right where our backyards are bumping up against the wild. Okay, let's set the scene. Our mystery really kicks off with a virus that's on the move. A disease that used to be a problem way out in the bush is now appearing in Australia's largest cities, and we've got to figure out why.
So, let's meet our main culprit, the Ross River virus, or RRV for short. It's what's known as an arbovirus, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's spread by bugs, in this case, mosquitoes. And down in Australia, it is by far the most common virus of its kind.
And listen, this is no common cold. When a person gets bitten by an infected mosquito, it can lead to crippling joint pain, fever, and a fatigue that can drag on for years. The personal cost is just huge, and the economic hit can be up to $5.7 million a year. That's why cracking this case is such a big deal. So here's the real head-scratcher. What was once a risk you might take if you went camping is now literally showing up on the suburban doorstep. We're talking outbreaks on the northwestern edges of Sydney, in those areas that are a mix of neighborhoods and bushland. And that right there brings us to the core of our investigation. See, a mosquito can't just keep a virus going all by itself. It needs a reservoir, a sort of animal home base that it can bite to pick up the virus and then pass it along to its next victim, which could be another animal. Or, a person. So the big question for our scientific detectives was, who are the virus's urban accomplices? To find their culprit, the first thing the scientists had to do was round up all the usual suspects. And they already had a pretty solid list to work from. As you can see, previous studies had found evidence of the virus, these things called antibodies, in a whole range of animals, everything from native wildlife to even our own cats and dogs. Any one of them could have been the accomplice. But see, these new city outbreaks, they added a whole new twist to the story. So, for this particular case, the researchers decided to zero in on a very specific group, captive marsupials living in fauna parks located right inside these urban hotspots. So how did they actually track down their culprit? Let's dive into the investigation and this marsupial connection. The method was basically classic detective work, just with lab coats instead of trench coats. They took blood samples from over 250 animals. Now, they weren't looking for the virus itself, but for antibodies. You can think of antibodies as the virus's fingerprints. If an animal has them, it's proof that it was infected at some point. Now, the lineup for this investigation was really specific. You can see they heavily focused on one species, the tammar wallaby, testing more than 200 of them. But they also brought in some koalas, wallaroos, and wombats just to see if a bigger pattern might show up. Okay, the samples are in. The lab work is done. It was time to analyze the evidence. And wow, right away, they got their first huge break in the case. The results showed this incredibly clear divide. While 38 wallabies and wallaroos tested positive for those antibodies, not a single koala, wombat, or Parma wallaby did. The investigation was suddenly narrowing in on one family of suspects, the macropods. So they dug a little deeper into the wallaby data, and another clue popped up. The infection rate wasn't the same everywhere. In the colony based in Sydney, about 11% had been exposed. But up in the Newcastle colony, that number jumped to a third of the entire population. Clearly, location was a huge factor. But the highest rate of infection, it didn't even come from the wallabies. It came from their bigger cousins, the wallaroos, an incredible 36%. More than 1 in 3 of the wallaroos they tested showed signs of a past Ross River virus infection. This was the highest rate of any group they looked at. And right here, this is it. This is the smoking gun. This quote from the research paper is the key to the whole mystery. It wasn't just that these animals had antibodies. It was that animals born and raised inside these city fauna parks had them. This proved the infections weren't happening somewhere else. They were happening right there, inside the city. So with all the evidence on the table, it's time to deliver a verdict. And, well, comes with a bit of a warning for all of us.
The conclusion is pretty clear. This study gives us really strong evidence that some marsupials, specifically macropods like wallabies and wallaroos, can act as what scientists call amplifying hosts for the Ross River virus, helping it survive and even thrive right where people live.
So what in the world is an amplifying host? Well, it's actually a pretty simple but kind of scary cycle. A mosquito bites an infected wallaby and sucks up the virus. Then the virus multiplies like crazy inside the mosquito. Later, when that same mosquito bites a person, it injects the virus and passes on the disease. The wallaby basically acts like a living reservoir, keeping the virus in play in that local area.
So, what are the big takeaways from this whole case? Well, first, we know that captive wallabies and wallaroos can definitely get this virus, even in the city. Second, they're helping keep the virus around in these urban spots. And finally, and this is important, moving these animals between different parks without checking them first could accidentally spread the virus to whole new places.
You know, this particular case might be closed, but it leaves us with a much, much bigger question. The story of the Ross River virus is a powerful reminder that as our cities keep growing, that line between our world and the animal world gets thinner and thinner. It really makes you wonder, what other mysteries and what other viruses are just waiting for us right beyond the backyard fence?